Hey y'all, how's it going? Today we'll be taking a look at the Meteor NF13, a rank 5 BR 7.7 starter jet found in the Israeli tech tree. It's a very interesting modification of the Meteor that made it capable of night interceptions. So let's dive in and see what this plane can do. The development process that would lead to the Meteor NF13 began in the years following World War II. The de Havilland Mosquito had served the RAF well during the war as a night fighter, but new jet bombers proved too fast for it to catch. In 1947, the initial specifications for what would become the Gloucester Javelin were put forward, but due to changes in specifications and other delays, this fighter would not be ready anytime soon, so an interim solution was needed. This solution would be to adapt a Meteor into a night fighter. Specifications were put forward in February 1949, and since Gloucester was busy working on the new Javelin, the Armstrong Whitworth Company, with their design team led by H.R. Watson, was given the task of modifying the Meteor. The team would base the design of the new fighter on the T Mark 7 since a crew of 2 would be needed. The team then replaced the tailplane with that of the F Mark 8s, exchanged the wings for the longer ones found on the PR Mark 10, and added a bulbous nose to house the radar. The radar the British chose to use was the American SER 720B, which was designated Mark 10 AI in British service. Since the nose was now occupied by a radar, the cannons had to be moved to the wings. This new Meteor variant was given the designation Meteor NF13 and made its maiden flight in January 1949. Production would begin in the 1950s, and the type began entering service in 1951. To equip its Middle Eastern squadrons, design work on a tropicalized version of the NF11 began. 450 pounds of extra equipment that included AC for the cockpit, a radio compass, distance measuring equipment, and the larger openings for the engine nacelles were added. The first NF-13 flew in December 1952, and production began in January 1953, with NF-11s currently on the production line being modified to the new NF-13 standard. In 1954, Britain agreed to sell 6 ex-RAF Meteor NF-13s to Israel. However, delivery of the aircraft was delayed until 1956 due to IDF reprisal raids. By this time, the need for a night fighter was becoming critical as Egypt and Syria had recently signed a deal to acquire IL-28s from the Czech Republic. Aircrew were sent to the UK for training on the type and would return to form the 119th Bat Squadron based out of Ramat David. The 119th Squadron would play a pivotal role on the eve of the Suez Crisis in 1956. At this point, the squadron was not operational, with only 3 of its 6 planes having arrived and only 1 aircrew available. This crew was composed of Squadron Commander Yoash Gato Zaidan and Lead Navigator Elishiv Shibi Brosh, both of which had recently been recalled from their night dogfighting training course in the UK. They were briefed on intelligence that Marshal Abdel Hakim Amir, Chief of Staff of the Egyptian Army and overall Arab coalition leader, was in Damascus for a visit and would be returning to Egypt late that night in an IL-14, basically a Russian C-47. At 10:30 p.m. on the 28th of October, they would get word that the Aleutian had taken off from Damascus. Gato and Shibi quickly followed suit in their NF-13, though they immediately ran into a problem. Their 2 external fuel tanks were not transferring fuel, so they were forced to ditch them. They continued out over the Mediterranean following guidance from ground controllers until they made radar contact at 3 miles. Shibi then guided Gato behind the plane, where Gato was able to visually spot it thanks to flames coming from the exhaust. Gato was then ordered to ID the plane to make sure that this was the one they were after, so he flew up along the IL-14, making out the lights coming from the windows. He then got up close enough to see that the people on board were wearing military uniforms. With his target positively ID'd, he was given the go-ahead to take it down. He then maneuvered behind the plane and reduced speed. Since the IL-14 was flying at the stall speed of the Meteor, Gato had to partially deploy his landing flaps to allow him to match speed. When he went to fire, he ran into 2 problems. The first was that the ground crew had loaded belts with tracers in them. When the guns were fired, these tracers momentarily blinded him. The second was that one of the cannons on the right wing jammed. This caused the plane to yaw to the left, and at such low speed it caused him to lose control. He managed to regain control quickly and still kept his eyes on the IL-14, which had now shut off its internal lights. As he lined up for a second pass, he aimed for the right wing. He waited until he was about to crash into the passenger plane before opening fire. The yaw caused by firing the cannons then walked his rounds into the main body of the IL-14, causing it to erupt into flames and explode. This then caused Gato to lose control once again and began plummeting towards the ground alongside the IL-14. With only 1,000 feet left before crashing, he managed to regain control and confirm that the IL-14 crashed. At this moment, he realized he was dangerously low on fuel and was vectored to the closest airfield. He managed to make it back on fumes, and as his plane was still rolling down the runway, both engines shut down. While Gato and Chibi had been successful in downing the IL-14, Marshal Amir decided to switch to a different plane at the last minute. Still, this was a great blow as a large portion of the general's staff was on board the ill-fated plane. Details of Operation Tarnagal would remain hidden for the next 32 years, as there were reporters on board as well. The NF-13 would continue serving with the IDAF until they were retired in 1962. In-game, the Meteor NF13 is equipped with the Mark 10 radar. This is a search radar only, so you won't be able to lock up targets, but you can use it to spot targets at a distance. The radar has 3 range settings, those being 2 miles, 6 miles, and 12 miles. It also has 3 search settings ranging from 150 by 23 to 150 by 38, and finally 150 by 68. The NF13 gets both a B and a C scope. I'll go into more detail on these differences within the next couple weeks whenever I get around to doing my radar tutorial, but for brevity's sake, a B scope is a top-down view with your position being on the bottom middle, so this is going to be the top radar, while the bottom one is the C scope. This is a kind of first-person perspective with your position being in the direct center of the screen. Being an early radar, it is prone to ground clutter, so the higher you are, the more reliable it will be. While it might not be the most impressive radar, it has helped me spot several enemies in the opening phases of a game. The Meteor NF13 doesn't have any ground ordnance or missiles, so we'll be skipping straight to the guns. For the guns, you get 4 20mm Hispano Mark Vs. Each gun has access to 195 rounds of ammunition, and with a fire rate of 750 rounds per minute, you're looking at a trigger time of 15.5 seconds. Since the guns are just outboard of the engine nacelles, it means finding the correct convergence setting is very important. Personally, I've been using either 400 or 500 for my convergence setting. While I'm not the best at aiming these yet, when I get a good burst in, I can be confident I will destroy my target. The stock grind isn't too hard for this plane. The performance is pretty decent stock, and the default belts will get the job done. So getting the required RP for each modification should only take a few kills each. Personally, I'd suggest going for the performance mod first and then getting the gun mods after, but if you want a more reliable belt, going for the ammunition for the 20mm early on isn't a bad option. The Meteor NF13 is powered by 2 Rolls-Royce Derwent 8 engines, each capable of producing 1,720 kilograms of force. The acceleration of the NF13 isn't anything special. If anything, I'd say it's one of the plane's weaknesses. The acceleration on the deck is alright for the first little bit, but once you get up to around 350 knots, it'll start to slow down, and when you hit 420 knots, it pretty much comes to a stop. That means if you want to reach your listed top speed of 518 knots, you'll have to come out of a dive. So this will force you to climb, which is actually one of the strengths of this plane. The NF13 has one of the best climb rates for a 7.7 jet, sitting at 7,480 feet per minute. Unless I missed something, the only plane at its BR that beats it is the LA200. When you're in a dive, do be careful not to exceed 540 knots if you do want to keep your wings attached to the plane. As for maneuverability, the NF13 inherits the strong maneuverability of the Meteor family, so you can be confident when going into turn fights against other jets, though the energy retention does suffer due to the high maneuverability and low engine power. Another disadvantage that comes with the longer wings and wing-mounted engines is a slower roll rate. One last thing to mention is that you do get an air brake, which is nice for an early jet, but it's really not that effective. When it comes to playing the NF13, I do recommend climbing up to 10 to 15,000 feet at the start. This isn't too hard to achieve, as all you have to do is put the plane in a 10-degree climb after takeoff, and you'll be around that altitude by the time you reach the battlefield. Also set my radar to 12 miles just for that little extra bit of range, though You won't be spotting small fighter-sized targets at that range with the radar. Depending on if you get down-tiered or not, you could go after bombers like the B-29s and Tu-4s while you're up there, or go ahead and start diving on people below you. You don't really need to worry about boom and zooming in this plane, as once you dive in behind them, just use your maneuverability to stick there and get the kill. When in a turn fight, if you can make good use of your air brakes and flaps, you'll generally come out on top of any engagement. Just be careful not to get yourself caught out in a low energy state, as you don't have the acceleration to quickly get out of there if you find yourself in trouble. I also highly recommend against committing in a head-on. I wouldn't commit to a head-on in general, but because the guns are mounted in the wings, it puts you at a significant disadvantage in a head-ons, making them more dangerous and difficult. Moving on to the economy of the NF-13, its RP modifier of 1.96 is a little lower than other 7.7s, however its SL modifier of 2.3 makes it one of the worst SL grinders for its BR. To unlock the NF-13 will require you to get 110,000 RP and pay 310,000 SL to purchase it. Crew training cost is 90,000 SL, while the expert qualification will set you back another 310,000 SL. The ACE qualification costs 1.7 GE, or will require you to get 720,000 RP while playing the plane. Spading the NF-13 will require 98,200 RP and 159,000 SL. If you want to put a talisman on the NF-13, be prepared to pay 2,100 GE. As for skins, there's not much to talk about here. Currently, you only get this default IDAF skin, and I haven't found any user skins available on War Thunder Live. This is one of my least favorite cockpits by far. Your forward visibility is extremely restricted thanks to the support frames. Side and top visibility is far from the best, but it's definitely an improvement over the forward visibility. Rear visibility, like the forward visibility, is also pretty poor. The instruments are pretty well laid out considering you've got your speed and altitude dials on the left, an artificial horizon in the top center, your climb indicator on the right, and engine gauges on the far right. The compass is a little hard to see since it's hidden behind the flight stick, but the biggest issue with this cockpit has to be the lack of a radar screen for the pilot. This forces you to use the HUD radar display, which takes up pretty much the whole right side of your screen. Personally, I think I'll just stay away from flying this plane in sim because of this poor cockpit. Alright, let's wrap up this video with the pros and cons and then end with my final thoughts. Starting with the pros as usual, having a radar may not seem like the biggest plus for a plane at this BR, but it can definitely help with spotting if you have trouble seeing unmarked dots. You may have thought that the addition of a radar and other modifications would take away the Meteor's signature maneuverability, but that's just not the case. The NF-13 can comfortably take on any opponents in a turn fight. The guns may be difficult to aim since they're way out on the wings, but when they do connect, they sure do pack a punch. Moving over to the cons, combining slow acceleration and bad energy retention can lead to some problems if you get yourself caught out in a low energy state, so be careful not to let that happen. Like I said just a second ago, the guns are placed in the wing roots, which is a really bad spot. At this point, nose-mounted guns are the norm, so having this suboptimal gun placement will put you at a disadvantage when it comes to aiming. Despite not being a domestic design or modification for that matter, this is still a new and unique aircraft, and if I do say so myself, it is a very fun plane to fly. It combines a radar with solid flight performance for its BR. Definitely something worth looking forward to early on in the Israeli tech tree. Have any of y'all played the NF-13? If so, what are your thoughts on it? We can discuss it down in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.